Let's talk about the DRC.
Volatile situation in the Democratic Republic of Congo.
The Democratic Republic of Congo is currently witnessing a brutal conflict, with recent reports placing the death toll at over 700 in its largest eastern city of Goma. This conflict in eastern DRC dates back to the 1990s. However, the present escalation is primarily due to the resurgence of a rebel group called M23, a group I will tell you about shortly. But first, let me show you what exactly is happening right now. The current escalation intensified in January 2025, resulting in the capture of Goma, the capital of North Kivu province, by the March 23 movement on January 27, 2025. The M23 rebel group is primarily composed of ethnic Tutsis and has been active in the eastern DRC for over a decade. Their resurgence in recent years is attributed to claims that the Congolese government failed to honor a 2009 peace agreement, which included integrating M23 fighters into the national army and addressing the protection of Tutsi communities against Hutu militias. Failure to meet their demands led to this renewed offensive, which started in late 2024. Since then, the group has seized significant territories in North and South Kivu provinces. By January 23, 2025, they had cut off road connections to Goma and reached the city's outskirts by January 25. Despite resistance from the Congolese military, United Nations peacekeepers, and other regional forces, M23 breached defenses and entered Goma on January 27th, leaving many dead in their wake. But amidst all of this, the DRC government has accused a third party, Rwanda, of supporting M23 fighters, a claim supported by the United Nations. This is resulting in growing tensions between the two countries, threatening the peace and stability of this region of Africa. But why is this happening? Who are the other factions involved in this conflict? And is this the start of a regional war on the continent of Africa? In recent weeks, a lot of people have reached out to me to learn how to express or communicate their ideas in the form of full-length videos like I do. You know, the kind you've always wanted to create, the kind you'd be excited to share within your peers in the most seamless, intuitive way possible, irrespective of your skill level. Now, InVideo AI enables you to do just that. All you have to do is type in the idea you want to create a video about. It's pretty game-changing. You can even edit whatever you like using simple text commands like add my voice. How cool is that? Now, unlike traditional video tools with steep learning curves that only solve parts of your video creation process, InVideo is the creative partner that you have always wanted. It removes all friction and puts you in the director's seat, letting you focus entirely on your vision and your idea while InVideo AI does all the heavy lifting. You can try InVideo AI for free today. This will save you hundreds of dollars that you would otherwise spend on editing, animating, and other production costs. Use the link in the description box below to start bringing your ideas to life today. Thank you InVideo for sponsoring this video. Now, let's jump right back into our story. To understand the conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo, particularly in this eastern region, we need to talk about its deep historical roots with ties to colonial history, ethnic tension, resource exploitation, and international intervention. Now, don't worry, I promise not to bore you with so many details. In the late 19th century, King Leopold II of Belgium, a man who had never set his foot in Africa, looked upon a map and saw an opportunity. Not a land of people, of cultures, or of ancient kingdoms, but a land of rubber, ivory, and boundless wealth. The Congo Free State, as he called it, became his personal property. A brutal empire where Congolese men and women and children had their hands cut off if they did not meet their daily rubber quotas. Leopold did not just steal resources, he stole futures. But the legacy of this brutality did not end when Belgium officially took over the colony in 1908. The Congolese were never meant to rule themselves, not in the eyes of their colonizers. Education was limited, power was centralized in the hands of a select few, and deep ethnic divisions were encouraged to ensure that unity would never come. This was called the divide and rule tactic. To the east of this tortured colony laid the kingdoms of Rwanda and Burundi. Small but powerful kingdoms ruled by the Tutsi aristocracy for centuries. When the Europeans arrived here, first the Germans, then the Belgians, they found a society already divided into two primary groups. The Tutsi, who were the elite herders who ruled this kingdom, and then we had the Hutu, who were farmers who worked the lands. But the Europeans saw something else. The Tutsis were tall, slender, with sharp features, more noble in appearance. This was enough for the Belgians to declare that the Tutsi were superior and natural-born rulers. The Belgians pursued a racist policy in Rwanda, stirring up hatred between Hutu and Tutsi in order to maintain their rule. And so, with the stroke of a pen and the issuance of identity cards, the Belgians turned an already complex social structure into a rigid racial caste system. For decades, the Belgians ruled through the Tutsi, giving them access to education, wealth, and power, while the Hutu were pushed deeper into poverty and resentment. But then came independence, and suddenly the Belgians, fearing the revolution they had set in motion, flipped the script. They began empowering the Hutu majority, encouraging them to overthrow their former Tutsi rulers. What followed was a bloodbath. In 1959, Rwanda erupted in the Hutu Revolution, a mass uprising that saw thousands of Tutsi killed, their homes burned, their power dismantled. Many fled east into the vast forests of the Congo, others into Uganda, where they sought refuge among the Congolese Tutsi communities that had lived there for centuries. As Rwanda struggled with this conflict, the neighboring Congo was getting set for its freedom from the Belgian Empire.
June 30th, 1960, independence comes to the Belgian Congo.
But just when this empire collapsed in the 1960s, the DRC fell into chaos. Shortly after the much anticipated independence, Patrice Lumumba, the DRC's first elected leader, was assassinated in a Western-backed coup. Mobutu Sese Seko, the man propped up by the CIA, seized control. He would later rename the country as Zaire, ruling his people with an iron fist for over 3 decades. Meanwhile, back in Rwanda, the Hutu made efforts to consolidate their power. But the exiled Tutsi never forgot what was taken from them. Many joined the Rwandan Patriotic Front, a rebel group formed by the Tutsis that fled to Uganda. They were led by this guy, Paul Kagame, a man who would later shape the entire Great Lakes region. In 1990, the Rwandan Patriotic Front, known as RPF, invaded northern Rwanda. This began the Rwandan Civil War. Although neither side gained a decisive advantage in the war, by 1992, mass demonstrations forced Rwanda's president, Juvenal Habyarimana, an ethnic Hutu, into a coalition with the domestic opposition and to sign the 1993 Arusha Accords with the RPF. But this ceasefire didn't last. On the evening of April 6, 1994, the aircraft carrying Rwandan President Juvenal Habyarimana and Burundian President Cyprien Ntaryamira, both ethnic Hutu, was shot down with surface-to-air missile as their jet prepared to land in Kigali, Rwanda. Both men died in this attack, and from here, all hell broke loose. The Rwandan genocide began. And in just 100 days, nearly 1 million Tutsi were slaughtered by their Hutu neighbors. Kagame's RPF managed to break through enemy lines and stormed into Rwanda, overthrowing the Hutu government and taking power. But not before millions of Hutu refugees, including those responsible for this genocide, fled into this eastern region of the Democratic Republic of Congo, still known as Zaire at the time. And there, among the forests and mountains, the seeds of today's conflict were sown. The Rwandan genocide did not end with Kagame's victory. It spilled over to Zaire, where Hutu militias known as the Interahamwe hid among civilian refugee camps. This guy, Mobutu Sese Seko, who had been ruling Zaire with an iron fist, welcomed these extremists as personal guests and allowed them to establish military and political bases in the eastern territories. From here, They attacked and killed ethnic Tutsis across the border in Rwanda and in Zaire itself. The new Rwandan government began sending military aid to the Zairean Tutsis in response. The resulting conflict began to destabilize eastern Zaire as a whole. Things then got to a boiling point when Mobutu's government issued an order in November 1996, forcing Tutsis to leave Zaire on penalty of death. From eastern Zaire, the rebels, aided by foreign government forces under the leadership of President Yoweri Museveni of Uganda and Rwandan Minister of Defense Paul Kagame, launched an offensive to overthrow Mobutu. Just when Hutu militias and genocide perpetrators thought they had found a place to regroup, another crisis much worse than what they had started back at home began. Deep in the heart of Kigali, Rwanda's capital, Kagame sat in his war room, his sharp eyes scanning the map before him. For 2 years, his intelligence operatives had been tracking Hutu extremists hiding in the forest of eastern Zaire. These were not just refugees, they were killers, the remnants of the Interahamwe, the Hutu militias that had butchered nearly 1 million Tutsis in 100 days during the Rwandan genocide of 1994. They had fled across the border, melting into UN-protected refugee camps, using them as human shields. But Kagame seemed to know their game. He turned to his closest ally, James Kabarebe, a Rwandan military officer who had been handpicked to lead the invasion into Zaire. The first shots rang out in October 1996. Kagame's forces, elite, disciplined, and fueled by vengeance, slipped across the border into eastern Zaire under the cover of darkness. The world had no idea what was coming. Officially, the attack was led by a new rebel group, the Alliance of Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Congo, AFDL, fronted by a shadowy Congolese figure known as Laurent Desire Kabila. But this was all a facade. The AFDL was Kagame's creation, sort of a Trojan horse meant to give the invasion the illusion of an internal Congolese rebellion. In reality, this was Rwanda's war. James Kabarebe led a heavy assault on the refugees camps, shattering them within weeks. But Kagame's true objective wasn't just eliminating this extremist group. Remember this man, Mobutu Sese Seko, who welcomed these guys that killed his kinsmen? Yeah, he was the main target. For decades, Mobutu had ruled Zaire like a personal kingdom. He lived in golden palaces, flew in Concorde jets, and bled his nation dry, siphoning billions while his people starved. The West had once propped him up as a bulwark against communism, but now, with the Cold War over, he was nothing more than an aging relic of a forgotten era. Kagame knew that if Mobutu fell, Zaire would be his to shape. The march began in the east. Kagame's forces, now openly allied with Uganda's Yoweri Museveni and Angola's government, pushed westward, crushing Mobutu's ragged army in battle after battle. The Zairean military, bloated with corruption and unpaid for months, collapsed almost instantly. As Kagame's forces advanced, they left no room for resistance. Cities fell without warning. Bukavu, Goma, Kisangani, all gone within weeks. By March of 1997, Mobutu's regime was crumbling, his allies fleeing, his once loyal generals defecting. By the time Kagame's war machine reached the outskirts of Kinshasa, there was no sign of Mobutu. The corrupt leader who was receiving treatment for cancer had fled, exiled to Morocco, where he would die a few months later. On May 17, 1997, Laurent Desire Kabila walked into Kinshasa as the new ruler of the country. Zaire was dead. The Democratic Republic of the Congo was born. This war was supposed to be over. Kagame's forces had marched from the hills of Rwanda to the heart of Kinshasa in less than a year. Mobutu was dead. The old world was gone. A new Africa was being built. This was the thought of many. In reality though, Kagame still had unfinished business. He had won, but the Hutu extremists were not gone. Not all anyway. They had merely scattered, and Rwanda's hunt for them would never truly end. But Kabila, the man Kagame had installed as leader, was now under pressure from his people to get rid of the foreign powers interfering with internal affairs of the DRC. Soon enough, what had begun as Kagame's calculated war of revenge spiraled into something far greater and far darker. Laurent Desire Kabila was a man who had spent his life fighting in the shadows. He had watched Mobutu rule for 3 decades and had dreamed of the day he would take power. But now that he was president, he didn't feel like it. They called him a puppet, a man installed by Paul Kagame and Uganda's Yoweri Museveni. And then in 1998, just 1 year after taking power, Kabila made his move. He expelled all Rwandan and Ugandan military advisors from his government, publicly humiliating Kagame. He turned to Angola, Zimbabwe, and Namibia, forging a new alliance, one that had nothing to do with his old masters. This was practically declaring war on his former allies. And with this move, the Second Congo War began. August 1998, the invasion came like a storm. Rwanda and Uganda unleashed a 2-pronged assault, a war machine that had already conquered the Congo once before. Kigali's forces surged westward, seizing Goma and Bukavu in a matter of days. Ugandan forces swept in from the north, cutting off supply routes. A new rebel army called the Rally for Congolese Democracy (RCD) was created overnight, a carbon copy of the AFDL that had toppled Mobutu. Kagame thought it would be easy, but the Congo had changed. Kabila was no Mobutu. Unlike the weak, corrupt dictator who had once ruled Zaire, Kabila was a warrior. He had bled for this land, and he had something Mobutu never had: allies who were willing to die for him. In a matter of months, the Second Congo War had turned to the largest conflict Africa had ever seen. On one side stood Rwanda, Uganda, and Burundi, backing their new rebel army, the RCD, and trying to install a more obedient leader in Kinshasa. On the other side, Kabila rallied an African coalition unlike anything the continent had ever seen. Angola was eager to prevent Rwanda and Uganda from taking control of Central Africa. Zimbabwe, where Robert Mugabe sent thousands of troops to protect his economic interests in Congo mines. Namibia joining the fight to preserve its regional alliances, Sudan fueling the chaos in retaliation for Uganda's past support of Sudanese rebels, Chad, Libya, and even North Korea, each pouring in weapons, money, and mercenaries to keep Kabila in power. The war became a battlefield stretching across thousands of miles from the rolling savannas of Katanga to the dense, suffocating jungles of Ituri. Kagame had expected another swift victory. Instead, he had walked into the African World War. Kabila knew that the only way to survive was to hold out longer than Kagame expected. But Kabila's enemies were not just on the battlefield. On January 16, 2001, inside his presidential palace, Laurent Desire Kabila was gunned down by one of his own guards. Kabila's son, Joseph Kabila, was hastily sworn in as president in place of his father. In a matter of months, he brokered a peace deal in 2002. Foreign troops withdrew. The war was declared over. But declaring a war over and actually ending it are two different things. As hostilities reduced between Rwanda and the DRC, it morphed into more of proxy warfare using armed rebel groups. When the war ended, the world tried to force a new order on the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The peace deal said that all rebel groups had to lay down their arms and be integrated into the DRC's national army. For some, this was an escape, a way to finally stop fighting. For others though, it seemed like a death sentence. Among those who resisted were the Congolese Tutsi, men who had fought alongside Rwanda during the war, men who had seen what happened to their kind when they were left defenseless. They were led by a silent warrior, a man who had survived war and exile, Laurent Nkunda. Nkunda refused to accept a peace that left his people vulnerable. According to him, Hutu militias, the same groups that had committed the 1994 genocide, were still lurking in the jungles, still organizing and plotting. The Congolese government, he claimed, was harboring their enemies. And so, in 2004, Nkunda and his men broke away from the army and formed a new rebellion group, the CNDP, known as National Congress for the Defense of the People. They were not done fighting. Now, to understand the M23 movement, you must first understand what it meant to the Tutsi in the Congo. For centuries, Tutsi communities had lived in eastern Congo, long before colonial borders were even drawn. But after the Rwandan genocide of 1994, hundreds of thousands of Rwandan Hutu fled into the Congo, many of them guilty of slaughtering Tutsis back home. This jungle soon became a graveyard of revenge. Rwandan-backed forces had hunted the Hutu extremists across the forest in the First and Second Congo Wars, but they were never fully eradicated. By the time 2003 came, those same genocidal groups, the FDLR, that is the Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda, were still attacking Congolese Tutsi villages, and the Congolese government reportedly did nothing about this. This was why Nkunda and his men fought back. With Rwanda's silent backing, Nkunda's CNDP waged a brutal campaign in eastern Congo, clashing with the National Army, seizing territory and defending Tutsi communities. By 2008, Nkunda's forces captured Goma, the capital of North Kivu, humiliating the Congolese government as a result. But then, the game changed. Rwanda was now careful about its image, and it decided Nkunda had become more of a liability. Rwanda would arrest Nkunda, and in return, Congo would help fight the remaining Hutu rebels. In 2009, Nkunda was betrayed, arrested by Rwandan forces, and placed under house arrest. The CNDP was absorbed into the Congolese army, and its fighters were promised high-ranking positions and protection. The war was supposed to be over at this point. But as we have come to see, wars in the Congo never end, not when other special interests are involved. The CNDP fighters did as they were told. They laid down their arms, they joined the National Army, and they waited. But the Congolese government, it lied. The government allegedly failed to fulfill its promises. And worst of all, it failed to deal with the FDLR, the Hutu genocidal militia still hiding in the jungles, still attacking Tutsi civilians. In April of 2012, a group of ex-CNDP soldiers mutinied, led by a man named Bosco Ntaganda, a ruthless commander nicknamed the Terminator. They declared the new rebellion the March 23rd movement, known as M23. It was named after the March 23, 2009 peace deal that the Congolese government had failed to honor. The rebels moved with deadly precision, and within months they had captured Goma, just like Nkunda had done years before. The Congolese army collapsed, just as it always had. But this time, the world was watching. Rwanda was accused of backing M23, fueling the rebellion just as it had done in the past. The UN threatened sanctions. The pressure continued to mount, but this group refused to give in. By 2013, Kagame pulled his support, and M23 was forced to retreat into Uganda and Rwanda. For nearly a decade, M23 waited in the shadows, watching and hoping that the DRC government would uphold its side of the bargain. Then in 2021, the same old wounds were reopened. By 2022, M23 had re-emerged, stronger, deadlier, and better organized. This was no longer just a rebellion. It seems more than just a war for survival even. All evidence now points to resource extraction and control. And this brings us to the recent violence we are witnessing in eastern DRC. But what does Rwanda want? Why does it continue to involve itself in this unending violence ravaging the DRC? Rwanda's involvement in the Democratic Republic of the Congo conflict is driven by a mix of security concerns, economic interests, and geopolitical ambitions. Since the 1994 Rwandan genocide, remnants of these Hutu extremist groups continue to be active in eastern DRC. Rwanda considers it a direct threat to its national security, The Rwandan government has since justified its military interventions in Eastern Congo as efforts to eliminate this FDLR before they can launch attacks into Rwanda. However, some have argued that Rwanda is exaggerating the FDLR threat to justify its prolonged intervention. Question though is why? The short answer to that is economic interest. Eastern DRC, you see, is one of the richest mining regions in the world, containing gold, coltan, tin, diamonds, and cobalt, which is essential for high-tech industries. Reports including UN investigations accuse Rwanda of looting minerals from Congo by backing rebel groups like M23. You see, Rwanda has no significant mineral reserves, yet it continues to export large amounts of coltan and gold, which many believe comes from illegal mining in the DRC. By controlling parts of North and South Kivu, Rwanda benefits from smuggling and exporting minerals through Kigali. Another reason why Rwanda may want to maintain its presence in the DRC is regional influence and military dominance. Under President Paul Kagame, Rwanda has positioned itself as a regional military power in Central Africa. Rwanda wants to establish itself as a key player in African security affairs, influencing not just the DRC but the broader Great Lakes region. And despite public condemnation by the West, these powerful governments continue to fraternize with Kagame when it benefits them. And then another reason for Kagame's presence in the DRC is the Tutsi-Hutu dynamics. Rwanda under Kagame, who is a Tutsi leader, seeks to protect Tutsi communities in Eastern Congo. M23, the main rebel group Rwanda backs right now, is composed of Tutsi fighters, and Kagame sees them as an extension of his regional influence. By supporting M23, Rwanda ensures that Tutsi interests in Eastern Congo are protected against Hutu and Congolese militias hostile towards Rwanda. So, is Rwanda's strategy working? Well, short term, yes. Rwanda has maintained indirect control over parts of the DRC through rebel groups like M23 and profited from mineral smuggling. Long term though, it's kind of tricky. International pressure is growing against Rwanda's involvement. South Africa and Angola are sending troops to challenge Rwanda's influence. The DRC is strengthening its military ties with the US and European allies. All this pose a problem for Kigali. But what's up with South Africa? How do they fit into all of this? The escalating conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo is triggering serious tensions between South Africa and Rwanda, with the possibility of a direct confrontation between the two countries. In January, at least 13 South African soldiers were killed in an attack by M23 rebels who are allegedly backed by Rwanda. This incident outraged South African leaders as it was one of the deadliest attacks on their forces in years. In response to the attack, South African Defense Minister stated that Rwanda was responsible for arming M23 and indirectly for the death of South African troops. South Africa has warned that any further attacks on its forces will be considered a declaration of war. This marks one of the strongest public condemnation of Rwanda's role in the conflict by another African nation. Rwandan President Kagame dismissed South Africa's accusation, suggesting that South Africa lacks credibility in peacekeeping efforts. Kagame has also implied that South Africa is being manipulated by the DRC government, which is using foreign troops to fight a war it cannot win on its own. This rhetoric has increased tensions between the two countries, with diplomatic relations becoming strained in the process. But what is the implication of all of this? Is Africa going to war? If the AU fails to prevent an all-out regional conflict, it could weaken its credibility as a peacekeeping institution. Failing to handle this conflict through diplomacy might lead to increased militarization in Africa. And if South Africa escalates its involvement in Eastern DRC, other African countries might follow suit. Angola has already deployed troops to Eastern Congo, and other SADC nations like Zimbabwe, Namibia, Tanzania could choose to join. This could lead to a military build-up across Africa, with more nations prioritizing armed intervention over diplomacy. This is still a developing story, and we hope it doesn't get into a full-scale regional conflict. For now though, the people of Goma are the victims of this situation, and I can't possibly imagine what they might be going through at this time. We'll continue to urge our leaders to make the right decision and end this violence before it gets out of hand. Thanks for watching. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below.